breaking free using our Pesach Seder to bring the Pesach redemption into our lives. We do not have a source sheet for this series. That being said, we are going to follow a little bit along through the order of the Seder, the Passover Seder. If you'd like, I brought children's Haggadahs here. By the way, some of the best Haggadahs out there are children's Haggadahs. They keep it nice, they keep it simple. If you want to use this Passover Haggadah on Passover, I highly recommend that you keep it away from those delicious Kaiser rolls and any other form of leavened food such as crumb cake. Alrighty. I also recommend using pen and notes because we're going to talk about a lot of ideas here, and a lot of them are really powerful ideas that you can introduce at your Seder on Passover. So I highly recommend, if you can, taking some notes. Some of the ideas here will be really powerful and usable. Okay, before we get into the minutia of the actual Passover Seder, let's talk about the name. Seder. What does the word Seder mean? Order, which, first of all, seems out of order in this case, right? Our normal meals have an order, right? There's Kiddush, there is the motzi, there's some fish, some soup, a little bit of roast chicken, some main course, and then, of course, dessert, right? That's a nice orderly meal. The Passover Seder is anything but orderly. It's chaotic, it's out of order, we stop and we talk in middle, we're drinking cups of wine here, cups of wine there, we're dipping vegetables, we're putting away vegetables, we're taking the Passover Seder plate off the table, on the table. It doesn't get to the food until way out of order, right? And it just seems to be very chaotic. So why is this meal called the Seder? It should be called the anti-Seder, right? Oh, where are you having your anti-Seder this year, right? Okay, so the idea that follows comes from a great sage known as, he was known by, a lot of Hasidic grandmasters are known by the name of the most famous works they put out. So, a lot of the Hasidic grandmasters are known not by their names, but by the name of their most famous work. And not just Hasidic. So, for example, there was a great rabbi who lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s, whose name was Rabbi Yisrael Kagan. He wrote a very famous work talking about the importance of not speaking gossip about others. And that book was called Chafetz Chaim, which means desires life, because there's a famous verse in Psalms. Who is the man who loves life, who loves his days to see good? And then the psalmist continues, guard your mouth from speaking evil. So he called his book The One Who Loves Life, because if we love our life, we should stop speaking evil. That's the simplest solution, by the way. There's anti-aging creams out there, and there's acai berry, and there's goji berry, and there's all sorts of other things that people who are stuck in sad multi-level marketing scams will try to sell you that will give you antioxidants and superpower and cranberry concentrate, and there's lychee, lychee berry, and I mean they'll give you all. If you want to live a really long life, the psalmist says, don't go looking for. You can also do the alternative, homeopathic medicine, but the simplest solution is don't talk bad about others. Talking bad about others is toxic to life. So, in any case, this great sage wrote a book about, it's called The Love of Life, HaChafetz Chaim, and he became known as the Chafetz Chaim. That's his name. You don't describe, no one says, oh, I heard this amazing idea from Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan. They say, I heard this amazing idea from the Chafetz Chaim. In the same way, this idea that we're going to talk about, the Seder, was an idea penned by a great Hasidic master. His real name was Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter, but he was always known as the Chidushei Harim, because that's the name of the book that he wrote. The most famous book that he wrote is called the Chidushei Harim. So therefore everyone says, oh, I heard this amazing idea from the Chidushei Harim on the Passover Seder. And he actually was the founder of one of the great Hasidic dynasties that's still around today, the Gerer dynasty. Today the Gerer dynasty is based in Jerusalem. Massive, massive dynasty, probably 100,000, maybe even more followers. Very, very powerful, very growing, thank God. An amazing group of people. And the founder of this dynasty was the Chidushei Harim. Mind you, his dynasty would be quadruple or 5 times the size, if not for, of course, the Holocaust. Most of his followers were wiped out in the Holocaust. Only he and a few followers were able to escape. Yes?
Where does the name Gerer come from?
It comes from a town in Poland. Most of the Hasidic dynasties are named after their town. So Gerer dynasty came from a city in Poland called Gora. For example, another example is the Satmar. Right? The Satmar dynasty came from a city in Hungary called Satmar Nemeti, and so on and so forth. So most of the Hasidic dynasties are named Vishnitz, Gerer, Belz. All these Hasidic dynasties were named after their towns, because basically the way it started, there was just a rabbi who lived in a town. And then he became greater and greater, and then people started following, people from outlying towns started coming, and eventually it started becoming this city that became the capital of a particular group of people who were following this leader. Then they followed his child and his grandchild, and it became a dynasty named after its town usually. So, that was just a little minor detour, which we are known for over here. So the Gerer dynasty, the first founder of the Gerer dynasty was a man known as the Chidushei Harim, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter, and he says the following idea on why we call the Seder the order when really it's the anti-order. So he says like this. He says, on the Seder night we do a lot of things. Only 2 of the things that we do on a Seder night are actual biblical commandments. Did you know that? As a matter of fact, this year, being that the first Seder is on a Friday night, there are 3 things that are biblical commandments. One of them is Kiddush. Kiddush on Friday night. Kiddush on Friday night, not on a holiday. Kiddush on Friday night is a biblical commandment. By the way, this is one of the easiest biblical commandments to keep. Even if you're not keeping Shabbat, you can do this one so easily. All you have to do, at a minimum, if you want to keep this mitzvah, there's obviously the whole Kiddush text, but let's say you're like, I don't know that whole text, you know, it's written in the book, I can barely see it, and I don't know how to pronounce those words. Here's the easiest thing. Friday night, you take a glass of wine, and you say just a blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Borei Peri Hagafen, and you drink it. And by the way, normally you don't say God's name in vain. I used it here because I'm in the process of teaching, which is why it's allowed. In any case, you make that simple blessing, and you drink the cup of wine, and you have fulfilled your obligation. It's a mitzvah, an amazing mitzvah of making Kiddush Friday night. It's a biblical commandment. It's that easy. If you want to say the whole text, that's great. Yom HaShishi, right? That's great. I hope you do that. If you don't know the text, and that's what's holding you back, don't let it hold you back. By the way, your doctor recommends it too. Your doctor recommends that you have a glass of wine every night. One night a week, it happens to be an amazing mitzvah. It's that easy. By the way, if all the mitzvahs were that easy and that enjoyable, I would be a super Jew. Okay, so that's just an aside. That's a detour. So please, if you don't do Kiddush every single Friday night yet, please do it. It's that easy. Just take a cup of wine and have in mind that you're drinking this cup of wine for the sake of the Sabbath, and just make a Borei Pri Hagafen, that simple blessing, 10 words, and bam! You get up to heaven, billions of years of bliss. That's it, for that simple mitzvah. Okay, maybe not billions, maybe just millions. I don't know. It's a long time, a lot of eternity. I can't count eternity anyway. Okay, now the Seder, so normally the Seder has 2 biblical commandments. On this year, because it's a Friday night, it has 3 biblical commandments. The first one being Kiddush, which is really a standard Friday night mitzvah. What are the other 2 commandments at the Passover Seder? So, the eating of the matzah, that's a biblical commandment. In the Torah it says, Ba'erev tochlu matzot. In the evening of the 15th day of Nisan, you shall eat matzot. So eating the matzah, see, not nearly as easy as drinking the wine, right? But it's also a biblical commandment to eat the matzah, and the telling over of the story of Egypt. The Torah tells us, "V'higarata lebincha bayom ahu lemar," and you shall tell to your child on that day, saying, "Bavor zeh asali Hashem b'tzeisi Mitzrayim." Because of this, God did for me when He took me out of Egypt. There is a biblical commandment to tell over the story of the Exodus, and as of course the Haggadah tells us, the more you tell over the story, the more you engage. Of course, today it's like almost like a race. Like, how fast can you do your maggid? Oh yeah, you did it in 25 minutes? Well, my family bought the express version. It was on tape. And and we did it in 15. Oh yeah? Well, I've been practicing. There's a special Rosetta Stone for doing the Magid, and we got it down to 11. Oh yeah? Well, I did it in 17 seconds. And then it just goes like awkwardly silent, like 17 seconds? That's uncomfortable. But the truth of the matter is that the more you talk it over, the more you read about it, it's like look, people spend hours at book clubs discussing a book. This is the book that is the story of our people. The more you spend discussing it shows that the more you value it. And the more you value it, the more praiseworthy you are, because that's the story of our people. And that shows that you feel that strong affinity to our people and our peoplehood, which starts at that story. When I was a kid, we used to have the opposite. We'd boast about how late our Seder went. Like, oh yeah, my Seder went to 1 o'clock. Oh yeah, well my Seder went to 2 o'clock. Oh yeah, my Seder went to 3 and my dad was already sleeping and we were still singing and and so on and so forth. Today, I know a family, they live in Muncie. Both nights of the Seder, they literally go until the morning. They do services and they go to bed. Amazing. Anyway. Now, in Maimonides, okay, Mishnah Torah, the Maimonides is the first codifier of all the Jewish laws. In the laws of Chametz and Matzah, chapter 7, halacha number 1, he writes, Mitzvahs aseh shel Torah l'saper b'nisim v'niflos shenasu lavosenu. It is a positive biblical commandment to tell over the nisim and nifloot, the miracles and the wonders that happened to our fathers b'Mitzrayim in Egypt. Belel chamisha asar b'Nisan. It should be done on the 15th night of Nisan. Shenemar, as it says, Zachar es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem b'Mitzrayim. Remember the day that you left Egypt. Now, so the mitzvah, according to Maimonides, of the Seder night, remember we have 2 mitzvahs only in the regular one, matzah and telling over the story. This year we have 3, Kiddush, matzah, and telling over the story. The way the Rambam, Maimonides, classifies this mitzvah is as a mitzvah to tell over the miracles and the wonders that happen. Now we normally think of nature being very ordered. And nature is incredibly orderly, right? That's how we're able to study nature. The entire field of science is based on the very premise that nature is orderly. That's why if I put this kind of bean sprout with that kind of bean sprout, I'm going to have that kind of offspring, right? The work of, what was it, the first guy who worked on genetics. Mendel, right? Gregor Mendel, right? The originator of genetics, right? So he basically saw, you put this kind of sprout with that kind of sprout, it becomes. So there's a certain order to it, right? If you, light a paper on fire, it's going to burn. It's going to happen again and again and again and again and again every time you do it, right? So there's a very, very set structure to nature, the way nature works. You plant a seed, you water it, there's sunlight, it's going to grow, right? If you don't water it and there's sunlight, it's going to grow slower. If you don't water it and there's no sunlight, it's not going to grow at all. And there's all sorts of laws to nature. And we see nature as something that's very, very orderly. But when we think of miracles, we think of it being as out of the ordinary. That's where the world is chaotic, so to speak. It's like where something unordered happens and just suddenly, boom, something miraculous, so to speak, happens. It's random. It's chaotic. One of the goals of the Seder night is to start really shifting our paradigm in how we understand the existence of miracles and the existence of the providential hand in the world. That's not chaos. That's not disorder. That's order. The miracles that occur are just as ordered as nature. They're designed, they're implemented, sometimes over centuries. Right? The story of the Exodus from Egypt was first spoken to Abraham hundreds of years before it occurs, 400 years before it occurs. They're implemented slowly, sometimes over decades or centuries, sometimes incredibly quickly, but they are nothing, there's nothing random about them. Nisim and Niflaot, miracles and wonders, which is what our job is to talk about on the night of the Passover Seder, is something that's incredibly ordered. And the more that we recognize that there is an order to our lives, even when things seem to come in out of the ordinary, whether they be for the good or the not good, the more redemption we see in our lives. We like stability in our lives. Stability is good. It's comfortable. And then something happens, And it could be something good, or it could be something traumatic. And we feel like, oh, this is coming in and it's disrupting the whole order of my life. This wasn't meant to happen. But the Seder tells us, no, that's actually order. That's how it's supposed to happen. That's what is supposed to go on in our lives. It's designed and implemented centuries ago. It was exactly designed for you. Let me tell you an example of a story where you see this sort of order, disorder play out, and you're able to see very clearly in hindsight that it was all very orderly. There's a boy who grew up in our community. His name is Avi Peshet. Some of you may know his mom, Barbara Peshet. So he is trained as an IT specialist, information technology. So he got a job with a firm that handles the IT for some of the biggest companies out here, the automakers. Like, we're talking about a huge, huge IT company. When he set up his job, he told his employers, I cannot work on Fridays after a certain time, 2 hours before sundown, whatever it is, I need to leave. So during the summer, it won't be an issue. But I just need to tell you ahead of time, before I take this job, that I will not work on Shabbos. I will not work on Friday late into the evening, especially in the winter months. They said, fine, no problem. It so happened, however, that his training was on Friday. There's one day of training where they take all the new employees and they put them in a room and they basically train them on corporate culture and how everything works in this particular firm. And he comes, he speaks to the supervisor of the training. He says, listen, I gotta tell you that I can't stay the whole day today. It's Friday, I gotta leave early. And they say, no, you can't. I understand that once you get your job, once you start, you're gonna leave early, that's okay, because you'll have projects. As long as you finish your projects, it's okay. This is a training, and every employee is 100% required to be here 100% of the time. You can't leave early. And he says, no, but I need to. I cannot stay here. He's like, no, yes, you can. You're going to stay here like every other employee. So Avi Peshet realizes there's no value in sitting here and fighting with him. So he goes back, he goes through his trainings, and he keeps looking at his watch. It's getting closer and closer to Shabbos. Finally, he gets up, and he starts walking out. And of course, the supervisor is watching him. And the supervisor comes barreling down the hallway. Hey, get over here. You're not leaving. I told you you're not leaving. He's like, I am leaving. So I'm bringing you right now to the HR manager. We're going to have you fired. And Avi, just starting out on a new job, right? This is a dream job, a huge company. He's just starting out. And he says, I'm sorry. I'm not going to stay here. I've got to go. So he drags him to the HR manager. Everyone's screaming at him. He leaves. They weren't happy with him. They didn't fire him because it wasn't his contract. But what do they do to him? They stuck him on midnight shift, right? So every IT company, you always have to have people around at midnight. There's updating of things to do. Just a very, very boring time. You're usually all by yourself. It's depressing work. That's where they stick people when they sort of want to punish them. So they stick Avi Peshet onto the midnight shift, and there he is, sitting there all by himself, isolated. It's not a great work environment. A month goes by, 2 months goes by. One day, there's this guy, Bruce. He's a big, black, Christian fellow. And he comes over to Avi Peshet and he says, your God's looking out for you. So what do you mean? He says, everybody else who was trained with you lost their job. The company's downsizing. This was during the recession. The recession had just hit. And the company's downsizing, and literally every single person who trained with you lost their job. You didn't because you were on the midnight shift. You were not with that whole cohort. And the midnight shift has a much smaller staff, and they weren't able to downsize that midnight shift because everyone was crucial. Your God was looking out for you. So things look random, things look chaotic, like, what's going on? Here I'm trying to keep Shabbos. I'm trying to do the right thing. And I get stuck on the midnight shift, punished, so to speak. This is what the reward that I get for sacrificing to keep Shabbos. It looks random. It looks chaotic. But then suddenly, everything becomes very, very clear. There was nothing random and chaotic about that. It was all ordered. Everything is part of a Seder. Everything is part of a plan. And the more we're able to recognize that, the more we're free. Because when we don't recognize that, when we think that we're being messed over by God, by the world is out to get us, then we're shackled. We're shackled in self-pity. We're shackled in isolation. We're shackled in misery. Because we just keep getting messed over by this chaotic system out there. Even cancer. Cancer is random, right? It's totally random. There's no way to predict. Obviously, there are behaviors that one can engage in that will increase their likelihood. There are plenty of people out there who engage in healthy behaviors. And one could easily feel like, that's it. Look, the randomness, the chaos got me. I'm just an unlucky person. Everyone else out there is just lucky. They're living within the normal order. And I've been thrown out into the waves of chaos. But no, the Passover Seder tells us that's not the way it is. And as we're going to see a little bit later today, there's often a great value in the pain and the suffering that we go through. And it's all part of an order. I heard a great line recently. There was a rabbi that I met. I'm trying to remember what his name is. But I can't remember his name. But I met him recently. He's a very interesting guy. He traveled the whole world, spent years and years in Southeast Asia, meditating and monking or whatever they do, you know. And now he's a rabbi. I think his name is Dov Bear or something. And he now is a rabbi in Jerusalem, and he has this phrase. He says, "Who would have thunk that this was what I needed right now?" So for example, he told me he was driving a rental car, right? And he's never been in a car accident in his life, so he didn't get rental insurance. And he's in the middle of driving. It was a crazy story. His flight got canceled because of the snow, and he had a major lecture in Detroit, and he was stuck in New York. So he's like, you know what? I'm just going to rent a car, and I'm going to drive through the night. Pennsylvania is pretty much snow-free. I'll just drive through the night. And he's driving through the night, and there's some sort of craziness on the ice or whatever it was. It wasn't even like very snowy, and his car spins out. The car is totaled, and now he knows they're going to come after him because they didn't get the insurance. And he says, who would have thunk that this is exactly what's supposed to happen to me right now? Who would have thunk? Wow, that's amazing. I wouldn't have. But I guess he did. Right? And what's great about that phrase to me is that it's acknowledging that we're surprised. Right? It's not like whatever happens is for the best. No, it's like who would have thunk? Like you're able to acknowledge, like you're surprised. Yes, you're shocked. Yes, you can't believe it, but also to recognize at the same token that somehow this is exactly what you needed right now. Who would have thunk that I need to go through this illness right now? Who would have thunk? But evidently, that's what's best for me right now. Who would have thunk? The idea of the Passover Seder is that if we want to really be able to achieve redemption, we need to be able to see order in chaos. We need to be able to look at our lives that are often chaotic and actually recognize them for an incredible amount of order, literally being dosed out to us in very perfect and precise doses, based exactly not only on what we can handle, but what's on very, very best for us. When we know that, we're free. Because we're removed from the shackles of anger and guilt and self-pity. And we're able to tackle whatever it is that's coming our way with a renewed sense of vigor. This is supposed to happen. This is orderly. Now let me go deal with it. Instead of wallowing and this is not supposed to happen to me. On the Pesach night, we affirm that our belief is that this world is ordered, despite it appearing chaotic. We affirm that God will change one form of order to the other miraculous form of order to redeem us as he did once before. The frogs were orderly. The lice was orderly, as was the blood and the pestilence and the boils and the death of the firstborn and the darkness and the hail. It was all orderly. It was God changing one form of order, the natural orderly form, into another form of order, the nisim and niflaot, the miracles and the wonders, which are another form of order, perfectly spun by God, sometimes working with centuries of build-up to bring about the proper exact dosage of redemption needed in this story. And the same will happen in our lives when we begin to believe that our lives are Seder, our lives are order and not chaos. Now, so that's before we even get into like any of the Haggadah. Next, before we get into the specifics of the Haggadah, the Seder plate. So there's a lot of items on the Seder plate. One of those items is a burnt egg. Why do we have a burnt egg on the Seder plate? So we also have a burnt shank bone, right? The burnt shank bone, or the burnt turkey leg, or whatever you use in your family. Different families have different customs. Burnt wing, some people use a turkey wing. So the idea is that burnt shank bone is supposed to remind us of the Paschal offering that would have been brought in the temple, that would have been burnt and roasted. But what about the burnt egg? So the burnt egg is supposed to remind us of another offering that would have been brought at the temple on all three of the major festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. It was called a chagiga offering. And the Torah says, I want you to be joyous with me, share a meal with me on your holidays. So they would bring a festive offering called the chagiga, and it would be a meal they would share with God on the holiday. It would be amazing. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? It's like amazing. It's like we set a table and God gets his portion and we get our portion. We all eat a meal together. How beautiful and spiritually uplifting that would be. So that was the chagiga offering, and it was brought at all three festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Now the reason why the egg is, why do we use an egg? The chagiga, you could not bring an egg. Right? I know we had egg salad today and tuna fish for lunch, but you could not bring an egg offering. It was like, God, what's on the menu for this chagiga offering? Oh God, I thought I'd make you a nice omelet. No. That's not how it works. It was an animal offering. So why are we bringing an egg? And the idea is that an egg actually reminds us of mourning. In the house of a mourner, after the burial, they're supposed to eat eggs. And the reason for that is that eggs are rounded. And it's supposed to remind us, some people also eat lentils, because lentils are rounded. And the idea is supposed to remind us that even though right now we look like we're going through a low point, and of course the person who passed is literally physically going through a low point, they're in the ground right now, but we believe that there is redemption. We believe there's the resuscitation of the dead. We believe that we will come up from where we are, that they already right now are coming up into a better life, a better world, the world to come. So we eat the egg as a sign of sort of mourning, and that's why it's burnt, to remember the burnt temple. That's preventing us from having that chagiga offering today. Now, why are we doing this at our Passover Seder? The Passover Seder is about the redemption from Egypt. It's got nothing to do with Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. But we've got like a symbol of the mourning for the temple at our Passover Seder. I'll tell you another connection between Passover and the destruction of the temple. And this is actually fascinating. There is a system, there's many different systems of numerology in Judaism. The most famous one is called gematria, where every letter is assigned a numerical value. So Aleph through Yud is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then from Chaf till Kuf, we go by 10. So it would be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And then Resh is 200, Shin is 300, and Taf is 400. That's the most famous form of numerology. There's another one, it's called At-Bash. And in that one, the first letter and the last letter of the alphabet are interchangeable, as is the second letter and the second to last letter, and the third letter and the third to last letter, and the fourth letter. Okay, so it's called At-Bash Gardak, right? Okay, so Aleph is interchangeable with Taf, Bet is interchangeable with Shin. Gimel is interchangeable with Resh. Dalet is interchangeable with Kuf. Now here's something fascinating. Whatever night, the first night, Aleph, of Passover falls out, is going to be the night that Tisha B'Av falls out. So this year, the first night of Passover is Friday night, which means that Tisha B'Av this year falls out on a Friday night. Of course, we don't commemorate it on Friday night. We push it off to Sunday. Bash, the second night of Passover, is parallel with the Shin. Which holiday starts with Shin?
Shavuot.
Shavuot. So this year, Shavuot will start on a Saturday night. Then you go to the third one. Gar, Gimel, and Resh. The third night of Passover is going to be the exact same night as the first night of what holiday that starts with a Resh?
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. That is exactly correct. So this year, Rosh Hashanah will be on a Sunday night, just like the third night of Passover is a Sunday night. Daled becomes Kuf. Kuf is, don't remember what Kuf stands for. But then Hey, the fifth letter, the fifth night of Passover, is Tzadi. Tzadi is Tzom Kippurim, the fast of Yom Kippur. So the night of the fifth night of Passover, which will fall out this year on a Tuesday night, will be the night of Yom Kippur. Isn't that fascinating? Now, what is connected to the first night of our redemption? At, Aleph, and Tuf. The first night of Passover is Tuf, is Tisha B'Av. That seems weird. Passover is the ultimate redemption. Tisha B'Av mourns the ultimate destruction. At our Passover Seder, we've got an egg on the table. The night that we're celebrating our freedom and our most glorious experience ever, we're also sitting there with an egg on the table, remembering the destruction of the temple, like a mourner. What's going on with that? Now, Rav Tzadok HaKohen, another great Hasidic master, very fascinating and unique in the sense that he actually grew up not Hasidic at all and became an incredible intellectual Talmudic scholar, and then had a meeting with one of the great Hasidic leaders of the time where he basically was just absolutely blown away by this great Hasidic master, and he became Hasidic. So he's sort of like, he's a hybrid in the sense that he's got like this enormous sort of intellectual standard Torah knowledge. Of course they all did, but he blends it into his work more. And then of course all the mystical Hasidic, Kabbalistic background as well. He says, if you notice, Moshe's mom, do you know where Moshe's mom was born? Where was Moshe's mom born? Okay, trivia question. Anybody gets this right gets to take at least 3 pieces of that amazing, is that a crumb cake of some sort? It's not that amazing?
I think it's an apple crisp.
An apple crisp. Okay, fine. All right. So if you don't want the apple crisp, you can have 3 Coke, Diet Coke, or Sprite. Okay. Where was Moses' mom born?
Was she born in Egypt? No.
So that's no. Where was she born? So here's the answer. You're pretty close. You can have 1.5. I'll tell you why. Sandy can have 1.5 cans. All right. She was born in the middle of the wall between Egypt and the outside world. If you ever walk into the old city, you walk through these massive gates, right? They're like big, they're like 6, 7, 8, 9 feet long. Moses' mom, Yocheved, was born literally in the wall to Egypt. As Jacob and his family was going down to Egypt, which they're going down into what would eventually be incredible suffering and pain, the mother of the Redeemer is born in the gate. Which is the idea that God is always planting the salvation within the challenge. As they're literally entering into the challenge, they're entering into Egypt where they would suffer slavery, horrific slavery, children being thrown into the Nile River, taskmasters beating them for years and decades and centuries. As they're getting into the country, the mother of the Redeemer is born.
400 years, I'm lost.
They did not live there for 400 years. They were living there
200?
for 210 years.
Okay, so you're saying Yocheved was 200 years old?
No, she was 130 when she gave birth to Moses. In biblical times, people lived longer. You can check it out. I mean, I'm serious. Like, if you look in the Bible, you'll see stories of people who lived much longer. Back then, people lived much longer.
And there's a wall around?
There was a wall entering into Egypt as you would come in with the customs and tax collectors and all that, and the major highways. You know, they didn't have them all. It wasn't a wall like a Donald Trump wall all around Egypt. But as you would come into the main areas, there was massive walls, and they would have tax collectors there, and you know, that kind of thing. Okay. Now, we can look at the egg on the Seder plate and recognize that just like God, in the first redemption, the redemption from Egypt, had the redemption planted while they were just starting the pain and suffering, so too now, God has the redemption planted for us. The Midrash tells us, what day will Mashiach be born? Tisha B'Av. In the midst of our suffering, between the walls, in the hardest constriction, is where the redemption is literally sprouting forth. So when we look at the egg on the Seder plate, it's there for us to remember that yes, we are in exile, and the egg represents the exile, but we're here with the shank bone, which represents Passover. The egg and the shank bone are right next to each other, reminding us that just like in the shank bone story, in the Passover story, the redemption was literally there just as the chaos was descending, so too our redemption could be right now walking amongst us. For all we know, Messiah is already here walking amongst us. Messiah is a man, right? He's not an angel or a unicorn. He's a human being who will remind the people of the importance of God before the ushering in of this amazing messianic era when people will recognize God. And for all we know, he's walking already in this world. He may be right now at a gas station filling up gas. Who knows? Right? But having that right next to each other, the shank bone and the egg, is what gives us that solace. 4 cups of wine. Why wine? Okay. Of course, why wine is not a Jewish question. We always wine. That's what we do best, right? Oi! Okay. Why not wine? Huh? Okay. Why wine? Wine represents the experience of the neshama. Has anybody here ever made wine? Really? Cool. Awesome. Okay. Now let's talk about that for a moment. First, do you enjoy making wine? Was it fun? No? Oh, really? I enjoyed making it. There was elements of it that I didn't enjoy, and that's why my wine didn't come out so good.
Siphoning was the best part.
Oh, yeah, to wrap the barrels, right?
Well, no, to suck it up to get the flow going, and you always drank a little of the suck up.
Sure, 100%. Why not?
I didn't make it. I helped my grandfather make it.
Oh, so that could be a different experience. Yeah, sure. So, did your grandfather live in Detroit? I may have used his wine press. The wine press that I used when I made wine was in the Jewish community of Detroit for over it's like 80, 90 years. So, for all I know, that was the same wine press that you used back then with your grandfather. Anyway, so making wine. Let's take grapes for a moment. How much do grapes cost? How much does a pound of grapes cost?
$1 something.
$1.50, $2. Wrong season, maybe you'll get up to $3, right? So three pounds of grapes is going to cost you anywhere between $4 and $9, right? That's not that much. But there are bottles of wine that are made out of 3 pounds worth of grapes that are going to cost you $900. There are bottles of wine out there, really good wine, that they will charge. These little small vineyards in Napa Valley or whatever it is will charge $900 a bottle and sell out their entire vintage. Like this. People are waiting. People are clamoring. Oh, can you get me a case?
Nouveau Beaujolais.
Which one?
Nouveau Beaujolais. That goes very quickly.
Okay, there you go. It's the Nouveau Beaujolais. So a lot of, people are clamoring, what happened here? How did it go from $5 worth of grapes to $900 worth of wine? There's a famous joke. This guy sees a wino sitting on the floor somewhere and he's eating grapes. He's like, dude, man, you gotta wait. So for those of us who have made wine, how do you make wine? The first thing you do is you crush the grapes. That's very important. You don't smash the grapes. You just crush them a little bit till they pop open and the juice starts to just flow out. If you crush them, you'll just get like a pulpy mess. That's not the goal. We're not trying to make applesauce over here. We're trying to make wine. So you put it through this grinder. It's a manual grinder. I'm sure they have machine ones, of course, when they make massive production of wine. And it's designed that the teeth are exactly far apart enough that it just crushes the grapes and pops them open, and the juice starts to spill out. And we let it spill out for a couple days. And you add yeast to that, the must it's called. It smells bad, attracts a lot of fruit flies. Okay, then you got to press it, right? You strain it, you press it, you get the more and more juice out of it, and you got a filter there. And then, of course, you have to let it ferment, right? So it's got to be in the proper environment. It's got to be aged in a cellar, preferably, or in a basement. The right blend of moisture and temperature. But then, really importantly, you have to rack it, okay? Rack it is, okay, so now you've got these big glass, I used glass, they're called carboils, right? They're like these big, 5-gallon, 6-gallon glass, like jugs. And the sediment, there's a lot of sediment in there, but the sediment will settle, and then what you have to do is you have to move the wine from one carboil to the other, leaving the sediment on the bottom, right? So you start a suction, which of course we know also is a great opportunity to sample your wine. You sort of suction it, and then you start a flow going, and the law of nature is that things will always flow to the lower thing. And it's really cool. The wine goes up and down, and then you stop the suction just above where the sediment is, and then you pour out the sediment, and then you now have less sediment. But that will take another few months, and you got to rack it again. You're constantly removing the sediment, because if the sediment stays in there, it might develop too much acidity, right? Too much tannins. But if you do it right, eventually you let it sit for a while, and eventually you're left with something glorious. $900 bottle of wine. Of course, my wine didn't go for anything near that. By the way, if you make your own wine, please do not force your friends to drink it. Most homemade wine is literally intolerable, but everyone who makes it for some reason thinks it's amazing. And oh my gosh, I made another batch, you gotta try this is great. And then all your friends are forced to sit there and drink your wine and compliment it as if there's any quality to this wine whatsoever. I would rather drink Manischewitz than drink my own, well, for those who like Manischewitz, I'd rather drink sweet, thick, syrupy wine than drink what I made. As a matter of fact, to be honest with you, most of the wine that I made was so bad that I just poured it out into the sink. I had a great time making wine. But you know what? I don't get that much opportunity to drink wine. I'd rather drink good wine. So most of it, gallons and gallons and gallons of my wine went exactly down the drain. But I had a great time making wine. I didn't do it right. I didn't rack it enough. Anyway, and there's probably other details that I didn't do right. I was a real neophyte. Let's take it to us. Grapes are good. Wine is great. But to get from good to great, or to get from grape to great, you got to go through a process. And it's a painful one. We all have a neshama inside of us. And your neshama is good. There's a prayer that we say every morning. Elokai, my God, neshama shenasata bi, the neshama that you put inside of me. Tahorahi, it is pure. You created it. You blew it into my soul. It's an amazing, pure soul. It's a great thing. Our neshamas are great. Sorry, they're good. They're good. Our neshamas are good. But they're not great. That's our job. And the way they become great is when we get squeezed. And we get squeezed, and hopefully, not so much that we turn into a pulp. That would be too much. We get squeezed just enough that our skin bursts open and we feel vulnerable and our juices are falling out of us. And then we get pressed. And then we get put in we gotta wait and things are not going the way we hoped they were going and it's taking time. And we need to be racked and we get moved from place to place, trying every time to leave a little sediment behind. But if done properly, we become great. Not good, but great. The Jewish people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they were good. They were amazing, but they weren't great yet. They had to go through the Egypt experience, where they got pushed and pummeled, almost within an inch of their limits, and they almost lost it. But just in time, they got racked, leaving the sediment behind, and came out as this amazing, amazing nation. That's the story of the Exodus, and that's the story of our own personal Exodus. We need to go through that in our lives too. And when those things happen, that's what we were talking about earlier. I said I'll get to it again soon. The value of our pain and suffering. The value of when we go through tremendous difficulties that can break many people. That is when our grapes are being burst open. And then we get pressed and we get racked. But if we do it right, we can go from being a $2 pound of grapes to being a $900 bottle of award-winning wine. Something so exquisite, something so fine, something so refined. That's what the Jewish people went through. You know what the Torah describes Egypt as? The Kor HaBarzel. Kor HaBarzel is an iron melting pot. If you go to these massive refineries, right? These metal refineries, what do? It's amazing to watch. I actually watched recently. I watched a YouTube video to watch how they make steel. It's unreal. Unreal. First they got to pull the iron ore out of the ground. Massive, massive dump trucks filled with tons and tons and tons of rock with iron ore, and it gets broken up, broken down, smashed repeatedly, and then it goes to this massive furnace where they're heated to like some crazy number of degrees, and it's boiling there, and then they pull this ladle, and this orange, red-hot liquid steel comes pouring out, and then they refine it and they burn it more, but eventually it comes out, this amazing substance. Hard, versatile, powers our world. Everything we have practically running on metal. The reason why we drink wine at the Passover Seder, and 4 cups of wine, specifically wine, is to remember this message. The Jewish people were grapes. They were really, really good. But it was through the Egyptian experience and the pain they went through that they became great. I just last Thursday night was at my brother's wedding. And both my brother and his new wife, his beautiful bride, were both previously married and went through difficult divorces. And I got to tell you, the joy at that wedding on Thursday night was extraordinary. Really, really, really extraordinary. More so than many of my other siblings who had just a great first marriage. Because there was this understanding of what this is born out of. This was born out of so much pain and so much refinement. It was just a more exquisite wine. Well aged and amazing as opposed to raw and fresh and somewhat unsophisticated. The joy of this wedding was just, it was indescribable. In our lives, freedom is not just about being a grape, free to do whatever I want, sort of haphazardly walking through life as if like nothing's going on. No, no, no. Freedom and real redemption is when we take on those serious, serious challenges in our life and we fight through them, and we come out much greater. Like the Jewish people, like the story of our nation, like the story of our redemption, like the story of our own personal redemption that we hope to experience and mirror through the Seder. And that, my friends, is all we've got for today. Thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you next week.